When you're the CEO of a company like Horizon Dynamics, people tend to think your life is flawless. On paper, mine was. The high-rise penthouse, the accolades, the tailored suits, it all looked perfect. But perfection is a fragile thing, and mine started to crumble the night I found that text on Evelyn's phone. Evelyn. My wife. The woman I built my life around. We met in a swirl of champagne and ambition, back when neither of us had much to our names except big dreams. She was everything I thought I wanted. Poised, intelligent, elegant. She could glide through a room of elites like she belonged there, while I still felt like the scrappy kid who'd clawed his way up. Lately, though, something had been off. It wasn't one thing I could point to, just a series of tiny shifts. The way she brushed off my touch, her sudden enthusiasm for late-night gallery visits, and her phone, always face down on the table. I told myself I was imagining things, that stress was playing tricks on me. But deep down I knew. Then I saw it. A message from Julian Ward. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? I stared at those words, my chest tightening like a vice. The phone felt heavy in my hand as the room blurred around me. Julian Ward. The name rang a faint bell. Some artist Evelyn had mentioned once in passing. I scrolled further, each message cutting like a blade. Flirty exchanges. Plans made in the spaces where I thought she was working late. I confronted her that night, unable to hold back the storm brewing inside me. Evelyn didn't deny it, but she didn't exactly own up either. She played it off, called it harmless, said I was overreacting. Her cool, dismissive tone felt like salt in a wound. You're blowing this out of proportion, Nathaniel, she said, crossing her arms. It's not what you think. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the cracks in her story, in her demeanor, were too glaring to ignore. Is that what you tell him? I shot back, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. That it's not what I think? That it's harmless? Her face tightened, but she didn't answer. That was the moment everything shifted. That night, Evelyn packed a bag. She left before dawn, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the city lights sprawling below, a stark contrast to the emptiness inside. The morning after Evelyn left, the penthouse felt different. Hollow, like someone had stripped it of its warmth. Even the view, my prized skyline, seemed dull. I wasn't heartbroken, not yet. The betrayal hadn't settled into sadness. It was still raw anger simmering just below the surface. That day, I did what I always do when faced with a problem. I strategized. My work gave me a blueprint for dismantling obstacles, and this wasn't going to be any different. Evelyn had chosen her side, but it was Julian Ward, the man she betrayed me for, who became my primary target. I didn't know him yet, not really, but I intended to. Hiring a private investigator was the first move. Within days, I had a thick file on Ward. He wasn't just some starving artist making waves in the gallery scene. Julian Ward was a man of contradictions, a rising star with a trail of secrets he'd worked hard to bury. The more I read, the more I realized his carefully curated image was as fake as the smiles at a corporate gala. Debts, lawsuits, rumors of forged paintings. The man had skeletons in every closet, and I intended to rattle every one of them. But what angered me most wasn't Julian's flaws, it was his arrogance. Evelyn hadn't just cheated on me, she'd chosen him. This man, with his phony mystique and flashy charm, had waltzed into my life, trampling everything I'd built. By the end of the week, I had enough dirt to bury him. Still, I knew better than to act impulsively. Revenge isn't just about striking back, it's about precision. The first step? Destroy his reputation in the art world. I started by planting rumors, subtle ones, anonymous tips to curators and gallery owners about Ward's questionable authenticity, whispers about his financial instability, how he barely paid his assistants, how collectors who bought his work ended up regretting it. At first, nothing happened. People dismissed the rumors, chalking them up to jealousy from lesser-known artists. But then I escalated. I hired a team to forge documents linking him to a major embezzlement scandal involving one of his recent gallery shows. It was all fiction, of course, but the paper trail looked damning enough to pass scrutiny. An anonymous email to the right journalist set the ball rolling. The fallout was immediate. A week later, federal agents raided Julian's studio. News spread like wildfire across the art community, tarnishing his once promising career. Collectors pulled out of deals. Galleries removed his paintings. And just when I thought I couldn't feel any colder, I saw the footage on the evening news. Julian Ward, dragged out of his studio in handcuffs. Evelyn was there too, standing in the background, her face pale and shocked. Seeing her watch him fall from grace should have felt satisfying, but it didn't. Instead, it fueled something darker inside me, a need to show her what it felt like to be powerless, to have everything you value stripped away. And this was just the beginning. Julian's arrest was the first domino, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. His public downfall would fade with time if I let it stop there. The art world loves a redemption arc, after all. I couldn't risk him rebuilding his reputation, or worse, Evelyn staying by his side through it all. Evelyn. I'd hoped seeing Julian dragged away in handcuffs would make her reflect on the wreckage she'd caused. Maybe it would knock some sense into her. But no. When she finally called me 2 days after the raid, her tone was defensive, not remorseful. I can't believe you'd stoop this low, she started, skipping any pleasantries. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the city skyline. What exactly are you accusing me of, Evelyn? Don't play dumb, Nathaniel. I know you had something to do with this. Julian's innocent, and you. I cut her off, my voice colder than I expected. You should choose your next words very carefully. Innocent men don't have the FBI tearing apart their studios. There was a long silence. I imagined her sitting in some cramped apartment, biting her perfectly manicured nails, trying to figure out what to say. This isn't you, she said finally, her voice softer, almost pleading. That's where you're wrong, Evelyn. This is exactly who I am when someone tries to destroy everything I've worked for. She hung up without another word. I stared at the phone for a while, the silence in the room louder than her accusations. 4 years, I'd built my world around her, trusting that we were a team. Now, all I saw was the cracks I'd ignored, the ways she'd chipped at the foundation while I wasn't looking. The next phase of my plan was personal. It was time to sever the financial safety net Evelyn still relied on. She'd moved into a small place uptown, using the money from our joint accounts to keep her lifestyle afloat. That ended with a few keystrokes. I called my lawyer and authorized the division of our assets. Evelyn wouldn't see a dime more than what was legally hers. The shared accounts were frozen, her credit cards canceled. By the end of the day, her access to the life we'd built together was gone. It didn't take long for her to notice. That evening, she showed up at the penthouse unannounced, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. Nathaniel, you can't do this, she said, storming past the doorman and into the living room. You're leaving me with nothing. You're wrong, I replied, standing my ground. I left you with exactly what you wanted. Freedom. Isn't that what this was all about? Your new life with Julian. Her face flushed, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she shifted tactics, her voice turning sweet, manipulative. I made a mistake, Nathaniel. But we can fix this. We can move past it. I almost laughed. You think this is something we can just move past? You lied to me. You betrayed me. And now you're facing the consequences. You're being cruel, she snapped, her veneer cracking. No, I said, stepping closer. I'm being fair. You gambled with my trust, Evelyn. And you lost. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but Evelyn wasn't the type to show vulnerability unless it suited her. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and walked toward the door, turning back with a final dig. You'll regret this, Nathaniel. One day, you'll realize you destroyed something we could have rebuilt. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone in the silence again. I didn't regret a thing. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of scotch and stood by the window, watching the city lights twinkle like nothing had happened. I thought about Evelyn's words, about regret. Maybe she was right. Maybe I would regret how far I was willing to go. But not yet. I wasn't finished. Evelyn's departure felt final this time, but there was still unfinished business. Julian might have been disgraced, but I wasn't naive enough to think the fallout would keep him down forever. People like him, the charming, slippery ones, always find a way to crawl back. That wasn't going to happen on my watch. I decided it was time to shatter the illusion he'd built around himself. Julian Ward wasn't just going to lose his career. He was going to lose the fragile respect that let him move in the circles Evelyn idolized. The private investigator came through again. There were whispers about Julian's personal life, rumors of infidelity, of liaisons with wealthy patrons who might not have been entirely consenting. The whispers weren't enough to convict him, but they were enough to draw attention if amplified in the right way. I arranged for an anonymous source to leak these stories to a tabloid known for sensational exposés. Photos of Julian leaving late-night meetings with certain married collectors made the front page within days. Social media exploded, with hashtags like #JulianWardScandal trending overnight. The art world, already wary after his arrest, turned its back on him completely. By the end of the week, his remaining patrons had dropped him. One of his collectors, an influential name in high society, publicly denounced him, returning several of his paintings to be auctioned off for charity. Galleries blacklisted him. Even his so-called friends distanced themselves, worried about the stench of scandal clinging to their reputations. It was almost too easy. Around this time, Evelyn reached out again. Not with the venom or defensiveness from before, but something new, desperation. "Nathaniel," her voice cracked over the phone, "I don't know what to do. Julian. He's falling apart. He's blaming me, saying I ruined him." "You didn't ruin him," I replied, calm and cold. "I did." There was a long pause. I could almost hear her struggling to comprehend what I'd just admitted. "Why?" she whispered, barely audible. "Because he deserved it," I said simply. "And so do you." Evelyn showed up again that evening, this time looking more defeated than defiant. She didn't barge in, she knocked. When I opened the door, she hesitated, her eyes darting past me to the penthouse she once called home. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she admitted, her voice small. I wanted to feel something, pity, anger, satisfaction, but I felt hollow instead. Still, I let her in. Not out of kindness, but because I wanted to hear what she had to say. She sat stiffly on the couch, her fingers twisting the strap of her bag. "I made a mistake, Nathaniel. I know I did. But you," she broke off, shaking her head. "You're punishing me like I'm the only one who's ever hurt someone." "You didn't just hurt me," I said, sitting across from her. "You humiliated me. You lied to me. You built a life with me, all while sneaking around with a man who couldn't even keep his own life together." Her lip trembled, but she held back the tears. Evelyn King never cried unless she wanted something. "Julian's gone," she said finally. "He's not who I thought he was." I leaned back, watching her carefully. "And now you're here because you think I'll take you back? That we can just forget everything and move on?" "No," she said quickly, though her eyes betrayed the truth. I don't know where else to go." I let the silence stretch between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, I stood and walked to the bar, pouring myself another drink. "Evelyn," I said, turning back to her, "you wanted freedom, didn't you? You wanted out of this life we built together. Well, now you have it. Go enjoy it." Her face crumpled, but I turned away before she could say anything else. This wasn't about getting even anymore. It was about cutting her out of my life completely. That night, after she left, I thought about what came next. Julian was finished. Evelyn was out of my life. The revenge I'd planned with such precision had played out exactly as I intended. And yet, standing there alone, staring at the empty penthouse, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. All I felt was the weight of what I'd lost, and what I'd become. With Evelyn gone for good and Julian's reputation in ashes, I thought I could finally breathe. But life has a way of catching you off guard when you think you've won. It was barely a week after Evelyn's last visit when my COO Laura came into my office with a look that instantly put me on edge. "We've got a problem," she said, dropping a folder onto my desk. Inside were reports of unusual stock activity, Horizon Dynamics shares being quietly scooped up by shell companies, all tied back to a familiar name, Victor Hale. Victor Hale. My longtime corporate rival and, frankly, one of the few people I genuinely hated. He'd been circling Horizon for years, trying and failing to take a piece of my empire. He must have seen the turbulence in my personal life as the perfect opportunity to strike. I worked late that night, poring over the reports, trying to anticipate Hale's next move. My revenge against Evelyn and Julian had consumed me, leaving my guard down at work. Now I was paying the price. The next day, I assembled my top advisors for an emergency meeting. Hale thinks he smells blood in the water, I told them. He's wrong. Horizon wasn't just my company. It was my legacy. I wasn't about to let anyone, especially Victor Hale, threaten that. Over the next few weeks, I focused all my energy on countering Hale's hostile takeover attempt. It was a game of chess, strategic, precise, and ruthless. Hale was betting on me being distracted, thinking my personal drama had weakened me. But he underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. I started by quietly buying back shares through my own network of shell companies, making sure Hale couldn't consolidate power. At the same time, I planted rumors in the business world, hinting that Hale's companies were over-leveraged and unstable. Investors began pulling out, and Hale's stock took a hit. But I didn't stop there. I had my team dig into his financials, looking for cracks I could exploit. It didn't take long to find them. Hale had made promises to his investors. Big ones. Promises he couldn't possibly keep. 3 weeks into our corporate war, Hale made his boldest move yet. He called a press conference to announce his intent to acquire Horizon Dynamics. The media ate it up, painting him as the underdog trying to unseat a tech giant. That night, I sat in my office, watching the coverage with a glass of scotch in hand. Hale's smug face filled the screen, talking about redefining the industry and unlocking new potential. It made my blood boil. But I didn't let the anger consume me. Instead, I smiled. Hale had just overplayed his hand. The next morning, I leaked a damning report to several financial outlets. It detailed how Hale's company was stretched too thin, how his promises to investors were built on shaky projections. It wasn't long before his stock started to plummet. By the end of the week, Hale's empire was crumbling. Investors were pulling out, analysts were questioning his leadership, and his board was in chaos. That's when I struck the final blow. I used my newly acquired shares to buy up Hale's most valuable assets at a fraction of their worth. By the time the dust settled, Hale's company was little more than a hollow shell. On the day the acquisition was finalized, I called Hale. "You made a mistake, Victor," I said, savoring the silence on the other end of the line. "You're a bastard, Nathaniel," he spat. I chuckled. "Maybe. But I'm the bastard who just bought your company. Enjoy the view from the bottom." I hung up, feeling a rare sense of triumph. Hale had tried to take advantage of my personal chaos, and now he had nothing to show for it but humiliation. With Victor Hale out of the picture, Horizon Dynamics was stronger than ever. But as I stood in my office that night, staring out at the city, I realized something. No matter how many battles I won, the emptiness inside me remained. The revenge, the victories, they gave me temporary satisfaction, sure. But they didn't fix what had been broken. I poured myself another drink, wondering if anything ever would. Life had settled into a steady rhythm. Work consumed my days, and solitude filled my nights. The penthouse felt more like a fortress than a home, but I didn't mind. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for control. Then Evelyn showed up again. It was a quiet Saturday evening. I just finished reviewing quarterly reports when the intercom buzzed. My doorman's voice came through, cautious. "Mr. King, there's a woman here. Says her name is Evelyn King. She's not alone." Not alone. My chest tightened, but curiosity got the better of me. "Send her up," I said flatly, already regretting it. When the elevator doors opened, Evelyn stepped out, looking different. Not the composed, poised woman I once knew. She looked worn down, her hair tied back carelessly, her expression raw. And then I saw the boy. He couldn't have been more than 5, standing close to Evelyn, his wide eyes taking in the marble floors and high ceilings. "Nathaniel," Evelyn began, her voice shaking. "This is Leo, my son." I froze. "My son?" The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. I ushered them inside, my mind racing. I hadn't seen Evelyn in months, and now she was back, bringing a child into my home? My first instinct was anger, but something about the boy's innocent gaze softened the edge. "Explain," I demanded, keeping my tone even. Evelyn sat on the edge of the couch, her hands gripping her knees. "I didn't know how else to tell you. Leo is Julian's son, but I'm dying, Nathaniel. The words hit like a freight train. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, the lie, the manipulation, but it never came. I have late-stage lymphoma, she continued, her voice breaking. The doctors say I have months, maybe less. I don't want Leo to be alone. Julian isn't. He isn't an option. You're the only one I trust to give him a life. Trust. That word coming from Evelyn felt like an insult, a joke. I wanted to throw her out, to tell her she'd burned the last bridge between us. But then I looked at Leo again. He stood quietly, clutching a small backpack, his fingers nervously playing with the zipper. This wasn't his fault. I agreed to let them stay for the night. Evelyn's exhaustion was evident, and I needed time to process what she'd told me. After she tucked Leo into the guest room, we sat in silence on opposite ends of the couch. "Why me?" I asked finally. "Because you're better than I ever deserved," she said, her eyes glistening with tears she didn't let fall. "And because I know you won't let him grow up with the wrong kind of man." Her words twisted something in me. Part anger, part pity, part something I didn't want to name. "I'm not making any promises," I said, standing. "We'll figure this out tomorrow." She nodded, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. That night, I barely slept. My mind was a battlefield of emotions: resentment toward Evelyn, sympathy for Leo, confusion over what to do next. But as the hours dragged on, one thought became clear. If Leo was going to stay in my life, I couldn't let him feel the weight of the choices that brought him here. By morning, my decision was made. At breakfast, Evelyn sat quietly while Leo ate his cereal, glancing at me every so often with cautious curiosity. When Evelyn stepped away, I sat down beside him. "Leo," I began, unsure how to start. "Do you like living in the city?" He nodded, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. "Good," I said, offering a rare smile. "Because if you want, you can stay here for a while. How does that sound?" His eyes lit up, and he nodded again, more enthusiastically this time. Evelyn returned, her face a mix of relief and sadness. She didn't say anything, but her gratitude was written all over her expression. This wasn't the life I'd planned. It wasn't the revenge I'd envisioned. But as I watched Leo carefully stack his cereal box and bowl, I felt something unexpected, a flicker of purpose. Leo stayed. Evelyn didn't ask questions or push me for promises, but I could see the relief in her every time I helped him adjust to his new life. For the first few days, it was awkward. He was quiet, shy, unsure of how to navigate this strange new world. And me? I wasn't much better. I didn't know the first thing about taking care of a child. My days were usually filled with board meetings, financial reports, and power plays. Not packing lunches or answering endless questions about superheroes and dinosaurs. But Leo, he made it easier than I expected. One afternoon, a few weeks after they moved in, I found Leo sitting on the living room floor, his small hands carefully assembling a Lego set. "Do you like building things?" I asked, sitting down on the couch nearby. He nodded, his focus never leaving the tiny pieces. "I used to build things too," I continued. "Not Legos, but companies. I built Horizon Dynamics from nothing." Leo paused, looking up at me with wide, curious eyes. "You must be really smart," he said earnestly. The simplicity of his compliment caught me off guard. In my world, praise was always laced with ulterior motives. But from Leo it was pure. Sometimes, I admitted, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine connection with someone. It wasn't about business or betrayal, it was about something deeper. As days turned into weeks, Evelyn's health began to decline. Her once vibrant energy faded, replaced by long naps and quiet moments where she seemed lost in thought. She spent most of her time with Leo, cherishing every second she had left. One evening, I found her sitting by the window, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She looked so fragile, a shadow of the woman I'd once known. "Thank you," she said as I approached, her voice barely above a whisper. "For what?" I asked, leaning against the wall. "For giving Leo a chance. For giving me peace of mind," she said, her gaze fixed on the city lights. "I know I don't deserve it, Nathaniel. But I'll never forget it." Her words didn't erase the pain she'd caused, but they softened the edges. For the first time, I saw her not as the woman who betrayed me, but as a mother trying to do right by her son in the time she had left. Leo, unaware of the weight hanging over us, brought life back into the penthouse. He filled the silence with laughter, questions, and an unyielding curiosity about everything around him. "Why is the sky blue?" he asked one morning over breakfast. "Because of the way sunlight hits the atmosphere," I replied, sipping my coffee. "What's an atmosphere?" "It's the layer of gases around Earth." "What kind of gases?" The questions never stopped, but I found myself looking forward to them. One night, after putting Leo to bed, Evelyn and I had a rare moment alone. She was sitting at the dining table, going through old photo albums. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" she asked, not looking up. "All the time," I admitted. She closed the album, her hands trembling slightly. "I made so many mistakes, Nathaniel. But Leo, he's the one thing I got right." I couldn't argue with that. Leo was everything good about her, untainted by the choices that had brought us to this point. "You still have time," I said, my voice softer than I intended. She shook her head. "Not enough. But I'm glad he has you now. He needs someone strong. Someone who won't give up on him." I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to tell her that I wasn't as strong as she thought, that I was barely holding it together myself. But for Leo, I knew I had to be. By the time Evelyn passed, Leo had become a permanent fixture in my life. The loss hit him hard, but he handled it with a quiet resilience that I couldn't help but admire. He cried, of course, but he didn't let the grief consume him. Instead, he clung to me, looking to me for guidance and stability. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose beyond revenge and ambition. Leo didn't just change my life, he saved it. The days after Evelyn's passing were quiet, yet strangely full. Leo and I settled into a rhythm, an unexpected partnership that neither of us had planned for. I still went to the office, still made decisions that impacted the future of Horizon Dynamics, but something had shifted. My focus was no longer solely on the company. In the mornings, I packed Leo's lunch. In the evenings, I helped him with his homework, even though second-grade math wasn't exactly in my wheelhouse. And on weekends, we found new ways to fill the time. Trips to the park, visits to museums, or simply building Lego cities on the living room floor. One Saturday, we were at a local bookstore. Leo had wandered off to the children's section, and I was flipping through a book on business strategy when a woman approached me. She looked familiar, her auburn hair tied back in a loose braid, her smile warm but hesitant. "Nathaniel King, right?" she asked. I nodded, trying to place her face. "Clara Evans," she said, extending a hand. "I used to work with Evelyn at the gallery." Ah, that was it. Clara had been one of Evelyn's closest friends in the early days of her art world endeavors. "I'm sorry to hear about Evelyn," she said sincerely. "She talked about you and Leo a lot toward the end. She was proud of how you stepped up for him." I wasn't sure how to respond. "Thank you," I said simply. We chatted for a while, mostly about Evelyn's time at the gallery and how much Leo had grown. Before she left, Clara hesitated, then handed me her card. "If you ever need advice about Leo, or just someone to talk to, don't hesitate to call," she said. I pocketed the card, not thinking much of it at the time. But something about her words stayed with me. Leo's presence in my life was a constant reminder of how much had changed, but also how much I had to learn. He didn't care about the complexities of my past or the weight I carried. To him, I was just Uncle Nathan, the man who tucked him in at night and made pancakes on Sunday mornings. But the simplicity of that role brought its own challenges. One evening, as I was reviewing a report on Horizon's latest product launch, Leo walked into the room holding a crumpled piece of paper. "Uncle Nathan, I need help with this," he said, handing me the paper. It was a school project, a family tree. My stomach tightened as I looked at the blank spaces under father and mother. "I don't know what to put here," Leo said quietly, pointing to the empty lines. I put down my pen and knelt beside him. "Your mom is an easy one," I said, writing Evelyn's name in the mother box. "And for father?" he asked, his voice tentative. I hesitated. How was I supposed to explain Julian Ward to a boy who idolized me, who saw me as his protector? "You can put my name there for now," I said finally. "Nathaniel King." Leo's face lit up with a smile that melted the knot in my chest. "Thanks, Uncle Nathan," he said, taking the paper back and running off. That night, I stared out at the skyline, wrestling with emotions I didn't fully understand. Leo had been a gift in the midst of chaos, but he was also a responsibility I hadn't asked for. Still, I couldn't deny how much he'd changed me. For years, I'd built walls around myself, focusing on power, success, and control. But with Leo, those walls didn't matter. He didn't care about my title or my bank account. He just wanted someone to show up for him, to make him feel safe. A few weeks later, Clara called. She'd organized an art mentorship program for disadvantaged kids and wanted to know if Horizon Dynamics would sponsor it. "I think you'd be interested in this," she said. "It's about giving kids a chance to express themselves, to find hope through art." Her pitch struck a chord. Evelyn's love for art had been one of her redeeming qualities, and I couldn't shake the idea of honoring that part of her legacy. "Send me the details," I said. The program was small at first, but it grew quickly, gaining attention from both the press and local communities. One afternoon, while visiting one of the workshops, I saw someone I hadn't expected: Julian Ward. He was a shadow of the man I'd destroyed, his once confident demeanor replaced with quiet humility. He was teaching a group of kids how to mix colors, his hands stained with paint. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear in his expression. But it faded as he approached me. "Nathaniel," he said, his voice low. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I admitted. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Thank you for this. For giving me a chance to start over." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to tell him I hadn't done it for him, that his redemption had been an unintended consequence of my philanthropy. But as I watched him return to the kids, I realized that wasn't entirely true. For all the destruction I'd caused, maybe this was my chance to rebuild something, not just for Julian, but for myself. Seeing Julian humbled, teaching art to kids who didn't care about his past, left me with a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, sure. Maybe a flicker of pity. But mostly, it made me think about Leo and the kind of world I wanted to create for him. I had spent so much of my life focused on tearing down obstacles, Julian, Evelyn, even Victor Hale, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to build something meaningful. Watching those kids paint, laugh, and lose themselves in creation, I realized this mentorship program was more than just a tribute to Evelyn's love for art. It was a chance to reshape my own legacy. That evening, back at the penthouse, Leo bounded into the living room, clutching a lopsided clay figure he'd made at school. "It's a dragon," he announced proudly, holding it up for inspection. I squinted, trying to make sense of the blob of clay. "Looks more like a potato with wings," I teased. Leo burst into giggles, then plopped down beside me on the couch. "You're not good at art, are you, Uncle Nathan?" "Not even a little," I admitted. "But I know a few people who are." He leaned against me, his laughter fading into a comfortable silence. "Do you think Mom would have liked my dragon?" he asked softly. "She would have loved it," I said without hesitation. "And she would have found the best spot to display it. Probably right in the middle of the dining table." Leo smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. It reminded me of how much he'd lost, and how much I'd gained in becoming his guardian. Over the next few months, the art mentorship program expanded, fueled by funding from Horizon Dynamics and the growing interest of other corporate sponsors. Clara worked tirelessly to recruit talented artists as mentors, and soon, the workshops were being held in cities across the state. Julian became one of the program's most dedicated instructors. He didn't try to approach me again after our initial encounter, but I occasionally heard from Clara about his work. Apparently, he had a knack for reaching the kids who struggled the most, kids who reminded him of himself, she said. I wasn't ready to forgive him, not entirely. But I started to respect the man he was becoming. One afternoon, Clara invited me to an event showcasing the kids' artwork. At first, I hesitated. Public appearances weren't my thing these days. I preferred to stay behind the scenes. But when Leo found out about the event, his excitement was infectious. "Can we go?" "Please, Uncle Nathan," he begged, practically bouncing with anticipation. I couldn't say no. The gallery was packed with parents, kids, and a handful of reporters eager to cover the success of the program. Leo darted from painting to painting, marveling at the creativity on display. I stayed near the back, content to watch him explore. That's when Clara approached me. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice warm. "This wouldn't exist without your support." "It's not just me," I replied, nodding toward the kids. "They're the real reason this works." She smiled, then handed me a small envelope. "One of the kids wanted to thank you personally. He asked me to give you this." I opened the envelope to find a crayon drawing of a tree with vibrant leaves and a swing hanging from one of its branches. At the bottom, in messy handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for giving us a place to grow." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the drawing. For so long, I'd measured my success in numbers, stock prices, revenue, market dominance. But this felt different. It felt real. Leo fell asleep on the couch beside me, clutching his lopsided dragon. As I carried him to bed, I realized I didn't just want to create opportunities for other kids like him. I wanted to create a world he could be proud of. The next morning, I called Clara. "Let's take the mentorship program nationwide," I said without preamble. She paused, probably trying to gauge if I was serious. "That's ambitious," she said finally. "Good," I replied. "Ambition is what I do best." Over the next year, the Horizon Foundation, a non-profit arm of Horizon Dynamics, became a beacon of hope for underprivileged kids. The mentorship program was just the beginning. We launched initiatives for education, entrepreneurship, and community development, all with the goal of giving people a chance to build something better. At the heart of it all was Leo. Every decision I made, every project I funded, was driven by the desire to give him a future filled with opportunity, hope, and resilience. Years later, at a gala celebrating the Foundation's achievements, I stood beside Leo, now a confident teenager. He was taller, bolder, and every bit the young man Evelyn had hoped he'd become. As the crowd applauded the Foundation's impact, Leo turned to me, his eyes shining with pride. "You did all this," he said. "No," I replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We did." The gala ended in a blur of handshakes and congratulations, but the moment that stayed with me was the look on Leo's face as he took it all in. The lights, the applause, the stories of lives changed. For him, this wasn't just a celebration. It was a glimpse of what was possible. As the guests filtered out and the staff began clearing the hall, Leo and I stayed behind. He wandered to one of the photo displays chronicling the Foundation's milestones, his fingers tracing the edge of a framed picture of Evelyn. She was smiling, holding Leo when he was just a toddler. "She'd be proud of you," he said softly, glancing at me. I walked over and stood beside him, my gaze fixed on the photo. "Of us," I corrected. Leo nodded, his smile small but genuine. That night, back at the penthouse, I found Leo sitting by the window, staring out at the city lights the way I often did. He had his sketchpad open, a pencil moving across the page in quick, confident strokes. "What are you working on?" I asked, sitting down beside him. "It's a design for the new youth center Clara's building," he said, showing me the rough outline of a modern airy space filled with natural light and open areas for art and learning. "Do you think they'll like it?" I studied the drawing, impressed by the thought he'd put into it. "I think they'll love it," I said. Leo grinned, the kind of unguarded smile that only kids can pull off. "You've got a gift, you know," I added. He shrugged. "Maybe. But I think I got it from you." I raised an eyebrow. "From me? I can barely draw a straight line." He laughed. "Not art. The part where you make things happen. That's what you do, Uncle Nathan. You make things happen." As the years passed, the foundation grew into something I could have never imagined. It wasn't just about philanthropy, it was about creating a legacy that mattered. A legacy that wasn't measured in profits or accolades, but in lives changed and futures made brighter. Leo played an increasingly active role, bringing a fresh perspective and a passion that reminded me of how much he'd grown. He wasn't the shy little boy who'd walked into my penthouse with wide eyes and a nervous smile. He was a young man with a vision, a purpose, and a drive to make the world better. And through it all, he never stopped calling me Uncle Nathan. On the 10th anniversary of the Horizon Foundation, we hosted a massive event to honor the people and communities we'd supported. I stood on stage, looking out at the crowd, my chest tight with a mixture of pride and humility. "This foundation isn't just about charity," I began, my voice steady but emotional. "It's about giving people a chance to build something better, something they can pass on to the next generation. And I know, better than most, how important second chances are." The applause was overwhelming, but what hit me hardest was the sight of Leo standing in the front row, clapping harder than anyone else. Later that night, as we packed up and prepared to head home, Leo approached me with a hesitant look. "What is it?" I asked, sensing he had something important to say. "I was thinking," he began, rubbing the back of his neck. "You've done all this, built all this, for me. But I want you to know, you didn't just save my life. You gave me one." The words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "I didn't save you, Leo," I said finally. "We saved each other." He nodded, his smile filled with understanding. Years later, I stood on the balcony of the penthouse, watching as the city stretched out before me. The skyline hadn't changed much, but everything else had. I wasn't the man I'd been when Evelyn left, or when Julian's arrest filled the news. I'd let go of the anger, the need for vengeance. It had taken years, but I'd learned that life isn't about the battles you win or the people you destroy. It's about what you build, the lives you touch, and the legacy you leave behind. As Leo joined me on the balcony, holding a cup of coffee like he owned the world, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. "Nathaniel King," he said, smirking. "Are you getting sentimental on me?" "Maybe," I replied, laughing. "Or maybe I'm just proud of what we've built." He grinned, leaning on the railing beside me. "Me too, Uncle Nathan. Me too." And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like everything had come full circle. The revenge was over. The pain had faded. And in its place, I'd found something worth holding on to. Something that would last.